A lot of people believe you need $1 million or more to retire, but that's not always the case. In this video, I'm going to show you what's possible if you're wondering if retiring at 65 with $500,000 in your portfolio is realistic. I'll walk you through John and Sarah's actual financial plan, breaking down exactly how they're able to make it work. And by the end, you'll see how retirement might be more within your reach than you thought. So this is John and Sarah. They have just under $500,000 in total investments, and they're spread out between their two Empower 401ks and two rollover IRAs held at Vanguard. They also have $15,000 in the bank between a checking and a savings account. And in terms of their property, they own their home outright with no mortgage and a current value of $300,000, which brings their total net worth to just over $800,000. Both John and Sarah are 64, and their goals are they want to retire right now in January of 2025 when they're both age 65. They want to spend $5,000 per month in retirement, and for the purposes of this illustration, their monthly expenses will be adjusted for inflation at a rate of 3%. Now, this $5,000 number does not include everything. This doesn't include things like property taxes or homeowners insurance. This is simply their core expenses. So that's food, clothes, and things you want to do for fun on a monthly basis. Both John and Sarah also want to prepare for healthcare costs in retirement. So here we are using the national average for both John and Sarah, which comes out to just over $6,000 per year for each to factor into the plan. Then there's long-term care, which honestly isn't a guarantee that everyone will use, but is always smart to plan for. So we'll come back to this later in the video, and we'll factor these costs into the last 2 years of retirement, adjusted for inflation at a rate of 5%, which is higher than the regular inflation rate just because medical expenses have outpaced normal inflation over the years. And so these are their goals. John and Sarah's salary when they were both working was $70,000 a year. John's Social Security benefit at age 67 or full retirement age will be $3,000 per month. And Sarah's Social Security, also at full retirement age, will be $2,000 per month. So one of the planning points here is if both John and Sarah retire January of 2025, Social Security doesn't kick in until they both reach age 67 and several months. So there will be 2 gap years where no income will be coming in. We'll need to figure out 2 big things. How much will John and Sarah need to pull from their investment accounts to cover expenses for those 2 gap years? And how do they make sure their portfolio continues to grow to fund the rest of their retirement and beyond? And we'll dig further into these in a second. But up to this point, we have a nice holistic perspective, right, of what John and Sarah currently have in assets, and we know their goals and what they want to achieve. Now, what we want to look at is, are John and Sarah on track to fund all this? And keep in mind, as a side note, this is just an example scenario and may not apply to your specific situation. You may have more assets, you may have less in assets, but please pay attention to the principles we discuss. Of course, yes, the numbers are important, but the principles we use can be applied to your situation regardless of how much money you have. So please keep that in mind as we go through all this. So we're going to start with retirement cash flows, which is the foundation and lifeblood of any retirement plan is cash flow. Now, if we remember, both John and Sarah's retirement date was January of 2025, and both are taking Social Security at full retirement age, which is 67 for the both of them. So we have these 2 gap years where no income is coming in. This is why if we look over here at net flows, we can see there is a deficit of just over $81,000 and then $88,000 that we need to fill in order for John and Sarah to meet their desired retirement expenses. In this scenario, they end up taking those expenses out of their retirement accounts. Now, could John or Sarah work 1 more year and better time their retirement date for when they plan to start taking Social Security? Of course they can, but in this case, they didn't want to do that. This is what retirement planning is all about. When income stops, the question arises, how are we going to strategically pull income from our investments without overpaying in taxes and running out of money? Once Social Security does kick in, we can see what the benefits look like for each of them starting January of 2027. So when we start that first whole year of retirement, here's what those expenses look like. We first have living expenses at $60,000 per year or $5,000 a month, and this increases every year adjusting for inflation. We know we have housing costs, and this includes property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, and we also have healthcare costs, which are increasing every year at a rate of 5% for inflation. And finally, we can factor in projected taxes, which brings us to this number just over here, $81,000. This is what we need to take from our portfolio, and it's much higher in the first couple years because there's no income coming in. So this remaining amount needs to come from their portfolio, which are all tax-deferred IRA accounts or 401ks. And the taxes are higher here because those distributions, even though they avoid the 10% penalty from being over age 59 and a half, the distributions still count as ordinary income. But they'll be able to pay the taxes and cover their expenses so they can live on $5,000 a month and cover all their basic living expenses. So this net flows column here is important to focus on because this number is not going to stay constant. At first, you can see the number starts high from no income coming in, then decreases because Social Security kicks in, but it continues to increase again due to factoring in inflation. And by the time John and Sarah start taking their required minimum distributions, in this case for both of them at age 75, in addition to still collecting Social Security, the deficit drastically drops, but then continues to pick back up again from inflation. Now that we know what we're projecting to pull out of your portfolio each year, how does that number compare to what your projected portfolio value might look like? That's where we get the concept of a withdrawal rate, which is the percentage of what you take out of your portfolio each year as income. And this is a really important metric to know. So if you measure KPIs in a business, which are key performance indicators, this is it. The withdrawal rate is the one to keep an eye on because this will tell us if we're taking a sustainable amount from the portfolio or are we taking out too much, causing our portfolio to be spent down much faster than we'd like. So looking at John and Sarah's scenario, they had these two large withdrawal rates in the first 2 years because that's the gap years they need to fund from their IRAs. But after that, it drops to 6% and then 4%, eventually coming back up to over 8% and beyond, because spending tends to increase in the back half of retirement from increasing healthcare costs. As you can see, sometimes these withdrawal rates, they can get quite high, and that's because they are dependent on several things. How well are you invested? How long do you need to withdraw money to support yourself? And will there be changes to income and expenses in the future? All of these will affect the withdrawal rate from your portfolio. Now, in general, we want to keep our withdrawal rate between 4 to 5.5%. That's a healthy range to determine how much to take from your portfolio. And right now, in John and Sarah's case, I wouldn't be comfortable with how high these withdrawal rates are getting after the initial few years of their retirement. Even though technically the system is saying they're going to make it and not run out of money, but keep in mind, this is assuming you are getting the same growth rate every single year at 7%. And I can tell you with certainty, you are not going to get 7% every single year in retirement. You may average that, you may average above that, but the sequence you receive those returns is really important and determines everything. So what can we do here? Well, first I want to address spending in retirement. Right now, we are assuming John and Sarah spend $5,000 a month, and that's adjusted, increasing 3% per year for inflation. There's something called the retirement spending smile. And all this is a bunch of research that reviews how retirees are actually spending their money. And the results show that spending starts to decrease over time. For the first 10 years in retirement, it's considered the go-go years, and this is typically where you'll spend the most money. Then you gradually move into the slow-go years, where spending starts to slow down. And finally, there's the no-go years, where healthcare costs typically kick in and spending increases again. So even though the amount you can spend is increasing 3% per year for inflation, your actual spending might only increase by 2% per year because you're not actually making large lifestyle changes every single year. Now, what would it look like if we make this adjustment to John and Sarah's spending in retirement? And it actually makes a rather big difference in their probability of success, going from 50% to 82%, and their invested assets at age 90 increased by almost $700,000 more. So they're not working longer, not selling their current home and having to downsize, but adjusting their spending alone can make a dramatic difference. Now let's go back real quick to their goals and add in long-term care. Again, these expenses would kick in for the last 2 years of retirement using the national average for in-home care. So let's see what this does to the plan. Okay, so with no adjustments to spending, our success rate dropped dramatically. And this is very common just due to the high costs of long-term care. So what can we do here? Well, let's first adjust the spending to the retirement spending smile we just discussed and make that more accurate. That increased our probability of success to 39%, so better, but still nowhere close to where John and Sarah need to be. What if John and Sarah each worked 1 more year and retired at age 66? That helped a lot more. We're now at 66% from 20%. And our invested assets at age 90 would be $800,000 more. So the point I'm trying to make is understanding the trade-offs and what options you have for your specific situation can take a plan that seems to have no chance of success and turn it into an outcome that ends up being dramatically different. Okay, before you go, let me ask you this. What if you could pay $0 in taxes on over $126,000 of annual retirement income? Sounds impossible, right? But it's actually achievable with the right planning. In my next video, I'll show you how to use a taxable brokerage account to create tax-free income in retirement. So if you want to maximize your income and keep more of what you've earned, click here to watch and I'll see you over there.